to Inside City Hall. Governor Hochul is calling for tighter federal regulations for the freight rail industry after a train carrying toxic chemicals derailed earlier this month, threatening the safety of residents in East Palestine, Ohio. This comes as Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was at the site of the crash, meeting with local officials more than 2 weeks after the disaster took place. Federal safety investigators also said during a news conference today that the derailment was, quote, 100% preventable. Here now to discuss all of this is Judith Inc. She's a former EPA regional administrator under President Obama and currently the president of Beyond Plastics, an organization with a mission to end plastic pollution. Welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thanks, Errol. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. What is the nature of the contamination that the residents of East Palestine need to worry about most?
Well, this is a very serious situation still, and I worry about their long-term health. Many cars derailed. 5 of them contained vinyl chloride, which is a known human carcinogen. That's a concern long-term, so we want to see long-term medical monitoring in place for anyone who wants it, not just in that community, but everyone who is downwind from that infamous giant black plume that was released after the train was detonated. There are certainly some short-term health concerns. We've seen media reports of people struggling with nausea, rashes, respiratory problems, bloody noses. That tells me that the testing being done by the environmental agencies is not comprehensive enough when you have federal and state officials saying, come on back, all clear after 2 days, water's okay, air is okay, but people are still ill and struggling. I think I know what they should do. They should test the surfaces in people's homes, not just the air, because the volatile, this is a very volatile chemical. It dissipates quickly, but just like when you're spraying an air freshener, it'll settle on your kitchen countertop, on your rugs, on your furniture. That needs to be tested. I also have some concerns that the officials are not testing for all of the compounds that they should be testing for.
So now when the federal officials say that the railroad company is responsible for this and responsible for the cleanup and threaten them, as the EPA can do, and say, look, if we end up doing this, we're going to charge you triple damages for not doing it yourselves. The railroad is going to really confine a lot of its efforts to its own rolling stock and the ground underneath it, right? They're not necessarily going to knock on doors and clean off and test people's kitchen counters.
They're not, but the EPA can do it and then send Norfolk Southern the bill. It's called cost recovery. So they're not just responsible for the contamination near the tracks, under the tracks. They're responsible for all of the pollution that was released and all of the health damages. EPA doesn't have legal authority to deal with individual health conditions, but it definitely has legal authority to require a comprehensive cleanup.
You mentioned the plume that we all saw and the possibility of contaminants traveling downwind. It reminds me of the days when there were a lot of concerns about so-called acid rain, where smokestack contaminants from Ohio would make their way all the way to New York. Is that something we should be concerned about?
I would not have immediate concern. It is definitely true that the prevailing winds will send air contaminants from the west to the east. And I too remember former Attorney General Bob Abrams filing these incredible Clean Air Act lawsuits against Ohio coal plants. This is a one-time catastrophic incident. You know, I wouldn't dismiss it entirely, but this is not really a major cause for concern at this point in the Northeast. I did check with state officials yesterday to see what their response was, and they didn't have much to say.
Okay. Well, when it comes to derailments, this particular outcome is unusual, but it turns out that derailments are not. I looked and saw that for the year 2021, nationwide, there are over 1,000 derailments, which is averaging about 3 every single day. Was that a concern when you were the regional administrator?
Absolutely, because while I was regional administrator, we saw the presence of Bakken crude oil showing up from North Dakota being sent to Albany by rail. And this is very explosive crude oil. I traveled by train to Boston to meet with my counterpart at the Federal Railroad Agency to learn more about the condition of our nation's rail system. And I have to say, I left the meeting far more concerned than when I went in. The rail system essentially relies on self-regulation. Very little inspection of the tracks. You know, there's one or two people responsible for literally thousands and thousands of miles of tracks. This is an area that needs much closer examination. I'm glad Transportation Secretary Buttigieg finally went to Ohio today. He has some existing authorities he can use, but he also needs Congress not to block new regulations out of his agency to improve rail safety. There's a big difference, though, between moving soybeans and corn versus hazardous materials. And that's really the root of the issue. We do not have to be moving massive amounts of vinyl chloride on the tracks simply to make plastic, which is what vinyl chloride is used for.
Yeah, I thought there'd be a plastics connection here at some point, and this is part of your current work, is to make sure that we're all aware of what all is involved in making plastic. It's not just about, you know, the bottles clogging up the oceans, that every step of the process really has some hazards involved in it.
It really does, especially in low-income communities like in Louisiana and Texas, where it's manufactured, and then for people living along train tracks, which is usually people with not great economic means. So this is a perfect example where there are reliable substitutes. Vinyl chloride is used to make polyvinyl chloride plastic, number 3 plastic. That's pipes for drinking water, which we can use copper or recycled copper. It's children's toys. Let's not have our kids chewing on PVC plastic toys. And also plastic packaging, where we have alternatives. So this is an unnecessary risk. I think we can get rid of vinyl chloride transportation risks altogether by not using vinyl chloride for plastic production.
There was a question about remediation I also wanted to ask you. My understanding is that they've removed 4,600 cubic yards of contaminated soil and over 1 million gallons of contaminated water and shipped all or most of it to Texas. The question then becomes, what is Texas going to do with this?
Yes, I've heard from advocates in Texas today about this. They are planning to inject it underground along the Houston shipping channel.
Oh, boy.
I think it's another example of not really being ready and prepared for these catastrophic incidents. And, you know, there's only so much you can do. So let's remove the risk. We can't remove all risk, but something like vinyl chloride, we don't need to be making it and shipping it and contaminating communities from Ohio and now to Texas.
Okay, well, you've given us a lot of food for thought. We'll continue to watch all of this. Thank you, as always, for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
Okay.